MedCram.com.
Welcome to another MedCram video. We've talked a lot about sunlight and how the benefits of sunlight can impact the human body. But there is another area of science which is growing very quickly, termed photobiomodulation, which is the use of light in health. And we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about some of the devices that are being used specifically for brain photobiomodulation, and the potential impact that these could have on long COVID. This slide that we're starting out with shows a photobiomodulation therapy device and a summary of all the things that can happen. The modulation of hormones, increasing macrophage activity, decreasing pro-inflammatory cytokines, modulation of the adaptive immune system. And then there's some other issues like antimicrobial effects, cytoprotective effects, antiviral effects, cytotoxic molecules rupturing the microbial membrane. We have blood vessels and specific cellular functions and injured lung tissue, cell signaling. All of these things are involved with photobiomodulation. And specifically, what I wanted to show you is this slide here, which is a search of the photobiomodulation articles that have been published going back to 1980. The knowledge and the amount of information that we're getting in this particular field of study is growing exponentially. These are the total number of studies accumulated for the year. And for me, this has been an evolution in my understanding and thinking about light therapy and how light can affect the human body. We've talked about circadian rhythm and depression, and these are things that have been well known, but we're now delving into areas that are not well known and are amazing in terms of the frontiers that we're learning about. So this is an emerging field for those people that really want to know how to improve health and some of the treatments that are coming down and some of the possible devices. This is going to be a good video. So I'm going to use COVID-19 as a prototype for exactly what the benefits of near-infrared light photobiomodulation can actually have. This goes way back to a video that we published on our channel in April of 2020. And it's this understanding that the ACE2 receptor and its loss because of COVID-19 infection can perturbate the balance between oxidative molecules and reducing molecules, causing an exacerbation in reactive oxygen species and therefore blood clots and hypoxemia. We actually showed that COVID-19 increases the amount of von Willebrand factors secreted into the bloodstream, which causes those clots, and you get the happy hypoxics that we talked about. One of the things that is well known to mitigate reactive oxygen species is melatonin. And very early on, we talked about the importance of sleep and its effect on the immune system and also on oxidative stress. The findings of oxidative stress in COVID-19 is well documented. This was a paper that was published back in December of 2021, showing that in patients admitted to the hospital with COVID-19, they had a reduction in antioxidants in the cell. They had an increase in the marker of oxidative stress and also in the marker of oxidative damage. And they showed that very clearly here. For instance, this was a measure of oxidative damage, and you can see across all of the different years that in those that had COVID, there were higher levels of oxidative stress in the cell, and specifically as a result of mitochondria. And this mitochondrial dysfunction has come to the surface as the major way that people develop long COVID. You can see here a tweet from Eric Topol, who's been following this, and other articles here, mitochondria and microbiota dysfunction in COVID-19 pathogenesis. Here's another article that was published in Science Translational Medicine in late August of 2023. Core mitochondrial genes are downregulated during SARS-CoV-2 infection of rodent and human hosts. Another one here, a study identifies mitochondrial dysfunction as the cause of long COVID fatigue. And so here we have the intersection of photobiomodulation exerts its greatest effects, also the intersection of the cause of one of the newest disabling diagnoses that we've had in the last 4 years, which is long COVID. This paper was published before the COVID pandemic hit. Back in 2019, it was published in Melatonin Research, and it was in this article that I first began to understand what was going on with photobiomodulation and the effect of natural sunlight, which contains a lot of infrared radiation, had on the mitochondria and the ability of near-infrared light to penetrate deep inside the body, Going back to our paradigm, you can see here very clearly that melatonin secreted from the pineal gland could be a mitigating factor against excessive reactive oxygen species in COVID-19 patients and in SARS-CoV-2 infected cells. But what became apparent to me is that melatonin from the sun, which is produced on site in the mitochondria, could also have a benefit of that. The fact that sunlight itself through near-infrared radiation could have a benefit, in addition to obviously ultraviolet radiation producing vitamin D in the skin, this was something that I think was a paradigm shift. And we produced at least 3 videos over the next year. The first one was in January of 22, where we published Light as Medicine, over 4 million views now on that video. Also, the case for sunlight in COVID, just a few days later in January 26 of 2022. And finally, when the randomized controlled trial using near-infrared light in COVID-19 from a group in Brazil was published in a prestigious journal, we published that about a year later on January 2nd, 2023, which showed that 940 nanometers of infrared radiation for 15 minutes a day, 7 days in a row could actually improve outcomes in COVID-19 in the hospital, specifically length of stay, and also pulmonary function testing and hematological testing. And of course, with that, my practice changed and added the ability for COVID patients to get sunlight. And we discussed that with a case where we took a patient outside who had COVID severe enough to require high flow oxygen at 100%, 35 liters. And we were able to get him outside in the sunlight for about 15 minutes a day every day. And we actually published that finding in our video that was published on December 6, 2023, Sunlight for Hospitalized COVID. Many have written me over the last couple of years in my advocacy of getting outside and getting sunlight that you live either in areas where that doesn't happen, or the sun doesn't come up early enough and you're not able to get it, or you're just not able to get outside. And so there have been many requests and there have been many projects I can see in replies to making their own devices that have near infrared radiation. Not every single day of the week is bright and sunny. Sometimes you have overcast clouds and you can't get out into the sun. And one of the things that we've noted and talked about is that near-infrared radiation is blocked by water vapor because water absorbs in the near-infrared spectrum, specifically at actually around 940 nanometers, as well as other areas. What this causes, of course, is our human tendency to see if we can package and artificially produce something in nature. First of all, I'll just say here at this point in venture that I still believe 100% that the absolute best way to take advantage of these mechanisms is to get outside and get natural sunlight. And that is the best way to do it, and it's absolutely free. That being said, there are situations where patients can't get outside. It's too cold, it's not enough sun, it's too dark, they're not able to physically. Patients are in the hospital, they're too critically ill, they can't be disconnected from the hospital. There are so many reasons why this could happen. And so people have looked into this area of photobiomodulation. Photo meaning light, bio meaning living cells, and modulation meaning an exertion influence on. What photobiomodulation is specifically is describing the biochemical reactions that occur in living cells in response to light. For some of us watching this video, this may be news to us. Except for perhaps the retina of the eye, we're not aware of any way in which sunlight or light affects the human body. And what we're going to find out is that is not true. Light does affect the human body in profound ways and in ways that we're just starting to understand. So just to be clear about this, historically, when you're looking up scientific articles, you're going to see this term photobiomodulation used in its alternate terms, specifically in biostimulation, cold or cool laser, low-level laser therapy, soft laser, and low-power laser therapy. And these are all terms that have been used in the past. Fortunately, in 2015, thanks to Dr. Praveen Areni, photobiomodulation therapy was actually added to the National Library of Medicine MESH database entry terms. And so these things will be easier to find for the most part. If you want to understand a little bit more about the definition, this is how they would say it. In this therapy, a light source is placed near or in contact with the skin, allowing the light energy or photons to penetrate tissue where it interacts with chromophores located in cells, resulting in photophysical and photochemical changes that lead to alterations at the molecular, cellular, and tissue levels of the body. Light induces a complex chain of physiological reactions in diseased and damaged tissues to accelerate wound healing and tissue regeneration, increase circulation, reduce acute inflammation, reduce acute and chronic pain, and help restore normal cellular function. Interestingly, recent research indicates that light can enhance performance in normal tissues and cells as well. And so this has been a very hot area of research. And as you can see, based on this graph, the number of articles that are coming out are increasing, and probably the number of indications and devices will be increasing as well. So in my search for understanding about photobiomodulation, I came across this database, which I'll make available to you in the link in the description below. This spreadsheet was put together by a scientist involved in photobiomodulation who's living in Finland. He's also a dentist. His name is Vladimir Heiskanen. Quite an amazing spreadsheet that he's put together with over 7,000 different research studies that are categorized based on the part of the body, the type of trial, and the outcomes. Of course, this is a searchable database, and so for those of you who are really interested and hardcore in looking at photobiomodulation, I highly recommend this link. It is updated, and you can find a lot of information on here. In this database, you can find studies like this and case reports, for instance, like this. A 57-year-old African-American man with severe COVID-19 pneumonia who responded to supportive biomodulation therapy. First use of PBMT in COVID-19. The wavelengths that were used here was 808 and 905 nanometers, and it was published here in this article. Another one here that you see, if you look over here on the right side of the screen, the adjunct low-level laser therapy in morbidly obese patient with severe COVID-19 pneumonia. Another case report, again at 808 and 905 nanometers. You can see there the name for this therapy has actually changed from PBMT to LLLT, and that's another reason why there really needs to be standardization of this type of therapy in order for it to be searched. But this database doesn't only include case studies, but also randomized controlled trials as well. Here's a paper that was published in September of 2020 on the JAMA network, and this was a randomized clinical trial, and it was looking at traumatic brain injury patients to see whether or not photobiomodulation would improve outcomes there. And here they used a post-concussion symptoms questionnaire. And the questionnaire ranked symptoms, and so the higher the number, the worse the score was. This one specifically is the RPQ-13. And the authors of this study made their own device, their own helmet, which emitted light at 810 nanometers. And it showed that over a 6 months period of time, there was a statistically significant reduction in the RPQ-13 assessment. Now, again, this is traumatic brain injury, not in COVID-19 patients, not brain fog or post-COVID patients. But this paper, Post-COVID Cognitive Deficits at 1 year are global and associated with elevated brain injury markers and gray matter volume reduction, a national prospective study. In this study, they took 351 previously healthy but hospitalized long COVID subjects, and they matched each one of them to at least 8 or more matched controls, matched for age, sex, first language, and level of education. And they assessed them 1 to 26 months post-discharge to see how they were. And what they found was that these post-COVID patients had lower cognitive scores, and it did not correlate with COVID-19 severity. And that recovery took months and was incomplete. As you can see over here in the graphs, the normative graph here is on the left. The middle one that's in red are the COVID patients, and then the long COVID patients here you can see in multicolors. Things like the neurofilament light chain, or NFL, and the glial fibrillary acidic protein, or the GFAP here, you can see were elevated and were indicative of brain injury. Things like tau, which actually looks at cognitive impairment, was statistically significantly elevated as well compared to the normative control groups. And so what we see here in terms of long COVID and brain fog is that it's not too dissimilar to what we are seeing in traumatic brain injury. Last year, we published a video on our channel, Treatment for Long COVID, and we looked at photobiomodulation and sunlight, but specifically we looked at this study looking at a device that was a helmet that transmits at 1070 nanometers. And the question that they were asking was, can we get the same effects in the human body by just doing helmets as we do with whole body photobiomodulation? And I guess the question might be, why would we expect the irradiance of near-infrared light into the brain by wearing a helmet help? Well, first of all, we've talked about that near-infrared light is able to penetrate through the scalp, through the bone, through the cerebral spinal fluid, which then diffuses it throughout the surface of the brain, and then the crevices conduct that light deep down into the surface of the brain where the gray matter is. Here's a paper that was actually just published at the time of our production of this video, which is March of 2024, showing the transcranial photobiomodulation for the brain and its wide range of clinical applications. You can see here over on the right-hand side of the screen a number of the different applications that they're talking about. For instance, angiogenesis, anti-apoptosis, cell migration, neuron growth, etc., etc. Here's neurogenesis. Even lymphatic drainage, which is important in things like dementia. So one of the questions is why would near-infrared light help? Well, there's been a number of theories that have looked at this, and it has to do with the mitochondria that are in the neurons, and the fact that the mitochondria is where energy production occurs, and that there's two ways of energy production. There is oxidative phosphorylation, and then there is glycolysis. And it's interesting because a lot of the effects that are considered to be relevant here is there are proteins in the electron transport chain, specifically cytochrome C oxidase, which can interact with light and cause changes. There's also other theories that near-infrared light also stimulates melatonin production and reduces oxidative stress, and also that near-infrared light makes the water around the FTPase, where energy production occurs, less viscous and therefore more effective and efficient. But let's read what this article that was just published this month shows here. Quote, the activation of mitochondrial metabolism by photobiomodulation can be characterized as a switch towards oxidative phosphorylation and away from glycolysis. This switch has two important consequences. Firstly, stem cells living in their hypoxic niche mainly rely on glycolysis for their energy requirements. However, when their mitochondria are activated by PBM, or photobiomodulation, they must leave their niche to go in search of sufficient oxygen to support oxidative phosphorylation. Once outside the niche, the stem cells become progenitor cells and can be influenced by any cues that might be released from areas of tissue damage in order to differentiate into somatic cells where they can then repair the brain. So basically what it's saying here is this light signals these progenitor cells, these stem cells, if you will, to go out and start actually replacing the damaged cells that were there before. This is a helmet that is made by the company Neuronic, and this is known as the Neuradiant 1070 because it puts out light at 1070 nanometers. They did a head-to-head trial against the entire bed, which is whole body photobiomodulation, which puts out two different frequencies, one at 660 and the other at 850. And what they wanted to do was to actually test out objectively to see whether or not you needed to have a helmet or a whole bed tissue irradiation. So what they looked at here is the data from these objective data sets. And in the first half, you're looking at transcranial, and in the second half, you're looking at whole body. And you can see that the improvement in the cognition score was the same. Here again, you're looking at transcranial and the improvement there in the digital symbol substitution test. And you're looking at whole body here as well. And it was about the same in terms of improvements in patients who had these cognitive assessments. And this led the authors to the conclusion that you could get the same effects with the helmet that you would get with whole body irradiation of infrared light. And if you want more information on that, please watch our video, and we'll put a link in the description below. One of the things that's also important to understand about photobiomodulation is normally you would expect a dose-response curve to be linear. So in other words, the higher the dose, the more the effect. In fact, it's actually biphasic. So in other words, there is a point of maximal impact above which you actually start to see a diminishing impact. And that was shown very effectively in this article, the biphasic dose response in low-level light therapy or photobiomodulation. And so these things need to be carefully thought out, and there needs to be advanced planning in terms of magnitude of the light therapy. The other aspect of photobiomodulation is this idea that pulsed light can actually generate distinct and beneficial neurocognitive effects. This was a paper that was published in 2023, and they looked at 3 different groups at 660 nanometers, 850 nanometers over 8 minutes. And they had those that were a control group, those that had continuous wave, and those that were pulsed, meaning that there was different frequencies, 40 hertz and 100 hertz, to see whether or not there would be an improvement. What they noticed is that when they pulsed the wave, they had actually better scores in terms of the sleep score, the psychomotor vigilance tasks, and delayed match to sample scores that were actually improved, and the average power within the gamma band, which is another way of measuring cognitive ability. And so this is something else that scientists have incorporated in photobiomodulation therapy, is the fact that they can be pulsed. I want to say up front that I have no financial relationship with either Neuronic or V-Light. Neither company is paying me to feature any of their devices in my video. I'm just doing this because there has been a tremendous demand to comment on what's going on in terms of devices, in terms of long COVID and other diseases that have potentially photobiomodulation as a treatment. So let me just tell you a little bit about what the current state of affairs are in terms of photobiomodulation helmets, their use in Alzheimer's disease, brain injury, depression, anxiety, long COVID, etc., etc. And right now, there are no devices that are FDA approved. The 2 major companies are Neuronic, which you see here, and also one that I'll show you in a little bit called V-Light. Here you can see on the Neuronic website under research the different diseases and some of the research that Neuronic was wishing to highlight. Both Neuronic and V-Light are trying to get FDA approval for their devices, and of course the research that goes into that and the time and the effort is quite arduous. And my understanding is that it could be anywhere from 2 to 3 years before these devices get FDA approval, and they will be specific for specific diseases. If we look at that long COVID category there at the Neuronic website, you'll see some of the references that they have used. And if we look at their device, it's not inexpensive. I consider it like a surgeon's scalpel. Just like a surgeon's scalpel, it is a tool that is used, but is best used when under the control of someone who is knowledgeable and understands what that device can do. As I'll show you here in a little bit, this device is not something that you just put on your head and flip a button. There is a number of inputs, and there are variables that you can input to have the desired effect. You can see here adding a 3-month consultation in how to use this device is actually going to be very helpful. This is the other company, V-Light, and they have a similar appearance, but I believe this one is slightly different in that there is a nasal probe as well. Back to the Neuradiant, Neuronic did send me a Neuroradiant 1070, and they gave that to me for free to try out, and I will be sending it back to them after I'm done with it. So as you can see here, this is simply a helmet that plugs in, and it's got light-emitting devices on the inside that irradiates the outside of the skull and penetrates through. You can put different sized pads on there, and you can see as it fits pretty easily on your head. However, this controller has a number of different inputs, and this is really where I think the genius of this type of a device has come in, is they've made it so customizable that if protocols down the line are found for specific types of diseases, they can very easily be entered here. As you can see, there is generalized settings like peace, focus, and energize, and these have different settings and pulses and durations. But there's also a customizable program where you can input specifically what part of the helmet is activated and for how long and at what intensity. And I think this is important in terms of being upfront with them in terms of consultation. So they have experts who are knowledgeable about the types of settings that they would require for different types of conditions. And again, that's why I would say this is very similar to a scalpel. So this is a tool that is used, and the outcomes will be based on consultation with the experts that understand and know how this type of a device would be used for your particular situation. I did notice on their website that they are starting a clinical trial and that they are looking for people to enter into that clinical trial so they can do further research and submit those to the FDA for approval. These are some of the eligibility criteria: 50 to 75 years of age, located in the United States, have mild cognitive impairment, have a computer and a smartphone, have a caregiver or family member willing to help, and willing to drive for up to 20 miles to obtain 2 EEG tests, one at the beginning and one at the end of the study. In the sake of equal time here, we have V-Lite, and they also have a similar device as we mentioned. If we ask on their website whether or not this is FDA approved, there is a message that comes up saying that no, it is not FDA approved. The FDA have categorized our devices as low-risk general wellness devices in accordance to the FDA's draft on general wellness policy on low-risk devices, dated January 20, 2015. All V-Lite devices have been independently TÜV certified as safe for consumer use, and I believe that is a German or European standard, as this company is based in Europe. So I hope this video has been informative. You may not have gotten specific information about the conditions that you have, but I believe that looking at that Excel spreadsheet, which we'll give the link to, and understanding more about the condition that you're specifically concerned about will give you more information in terms of that. I will reiterate again, I think that photobiomodulation therapy is a type of therapy that is a tool. The way that that tool is used will determine the outcome when that tool is implemented. Please don't forget to join us at medcram.com for all of your continuing medical education needs. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.